very warm welcome to everybody once again, to the Rifleman's Museum, particularly to our friends and also to those online. I think we're about 20 online, which is fantastic. Just before we start, quick announcement on developments downstairs. You'll know that we have been planning for some time to open a new display downstairs for the modern regiment, that was the Rifles, and that to be Afghanistan, a little bit of Iraq, a little bit of sort of current day stuff as well. We've been waiting on a national lottery grant. We've now got it. So, hooray! That's going to take place next year, and it will now happen. It's really exciting, and really looking forward to it. It's very interactive. Be a really great thing. We're also excited about Guy Walters, who's come here.
I'm not the national lottery, I'm afraid.
TV presenter and author. Last time you were here, we said we were doing Nazi hunting. We're not going to do Nazi hunting. We're going to do The Great Escape. And you're going to
You've got to get the punters in.
Absolutely. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for coming this evening. I really appreciate it. There is, where are you going to sit? You can sit down here? Yeah, sit there then. Yeah, exactly. And thank you. And hello to everybody online. Is the tracker working? This camera tracks me as I walk. Do you see? Is that working? No, oh, the first heckle already. Did you hear that? Okay, so the comms are all working. The tech is all working. They paid £10, so yeah, it's good. Okay, and you paid 20, so yeah, good. Thank you. Anyway, thank you very much for coming to me. Now, The Great Escape. Now, first of all, I need to know: has everybody seen the film? My goodness, as I was saying to Graham earlier, Graham, that man there, now a new friend of mine who's come on my Great Escape and Colditz tour. And I was telling him earlier that I gave a talk at the John Lyon School in Harrow. And the John Lyon, very good independent school, and it draws most of its pupils from the local Asian population. And I saw all these chaps, and I said, how many of you watched The Great Escape? And none of them put their hands up. And of course, you know, so I said, great, I'm going to give you a talk all about why I think a film that you haven't seen is a load of rubbish. And I thought that was a tough crowd, but you're a much easier crowd because you've all seen the film. So how did I get about writing The Great Escape? I did a book before this about Nazi hunting, which you wanted me to talk about, but I'm not talking about it, but I can come back and talk about it if you want me to. And I was talking to my agent. I said, I really want to do a book all about, so I did a book all about how Nazis escaped after the war. I really want to do a book called The Fourth Reich, looking at neo-Nazi recrudescence. And I could just see her, you know, dozing off. And that sounds really boring and really serious. So I was at lunch, and, you know, after about a few of them, I just went, all right, I mean, Great Escape. And she went, okay, sign here, let's do that. So that's how I ended up doing it. But the serious point is, I felt with The Great Escape, it's one of those stories that's turned into some national myth. It's Blitz, it's Dunkirk, it's The Great Escape, it's the Battle of Britain. It's one of those kind of iconic stories. And I felt the thing to do was actually, does this story that we think we know, is it really sustained by the truth? If you go back into the archives, and where's Mr. Stanford Tuck? Yep, so if you go and look at your father's MI9 debrief, that will tell a very different story to what people write about books 60, 70 years later after they've been copying everyone else's books. And as it goes through that kind of loop in which the stories get a little bit sexier every time, and I thought, let's go back, let's ignore all the other books written, let's go back to the original documents and do, if you can share your MI9 debrief with your dads later with people, I think that'd be great. I'd love to see it. And I thought, you know, let's get away from this version. Okay, I'm just going to play this for half an hour and then you can... Can we turn the volume up a bit? Doesn't matter to me. Come on, he's definitely going to do it today. He's definitely going to do it.
Los, aufstehen! Los, aufstehen! Hände hoch! Hände hoch!
Obviously, hand on. Okay, so obviously that really happened. Okay, that really happened. But you know, that's the reason I'm trying to get away from that. This is the reality of The Great Escape. It's a murder story. Okay, it is not, you know, Americans in Gap chinos, you know, riding the wrong motorbike, trying to jump over, you know, sunny fence, you know, Bavarian, beautiful countryside. It's a murder story. If you are of sensitive disposition, you'll be happy to know that those are not real dead bodies. Those are members of the RAF Special Investigation Branch recreating the murders of 4 of the Great Escapers outside Kiel. I've been to that place. I've identified every murder site in the Great Escape. This is now an industrial estate, so it doesn't exist as a field anymore. So the reality of the Great Escape, it's a murder story. And what I just want to, my argument tonight is going to be, let's get away from this whole idea that the Great Escape was unique, because it wasn't. There were plenty of Great Escapes during the war. Plenty of escapes carried out which had far more people getting out than the 80 who got out the tunnel at Stalag Luft III. In fact, of all the Great Escapes, the French, I'm afraid, had the best in terms of the highest number. I also want to argue that the Great Escape was counterproductive. In fact, by doing a Great Escape, you're actually clearing the pitch for other people in Germany. I also want to argue that by doing the Great Escape, you're going to get a phenomenon known as blowback. You are going to actually cause more trouble than it's worth. And I also want to argue the fact that, you know, what was the point in trying to escape? You know, at the time of the war, which people knew which way the war was going, March 44, they knew it was going. Was there any point? I also want to dismantle the idea that there was a duty to escape, because there was no duty to escape. It was an informal arrangement. There was no formal duty to escape. I also want to get away from the idea that everybody in POW camps wanted to escape. Most of them didn't want to escape. So there's lots about the Great Escape that, you know, we hold very dear, but I'm afraid simply doesn't hold water. And that's not me being some pinko commie journalist, you know, trying to unpick this stuff. This is based on what I read by escapers like Jimmy James. And you look at his, you know, records in the Imperial War Museum, and Jimmy James says only about a third of POWs wanted to escape. Okay, the rest didn't. Even in Colditz, escaping became a minority activity. So the idea that this was a kind of a thing that everyone wanted to do, it's a great story, but it ain't necessarily true. So I just want to, you know, just talk to you about that. And I also want you to talk about the idea that the technology involved in the Great Escape was unique to the Great Escape. You know, the penguins, you know, doing, is the camera still tracking me? Okay, doing shuffling all the sand out through their drawstring bags hidden in their pantaloons. You know, that wasn't invented by them. All the techniques of the Great Escape have been developed, you know, in previous wars, actually. So I think that's you know, what I'm trying to do, and then also argue about, was the whole thing worth it? Okay, I'm not going to be too gloomy like this all the way through. I promise you. Graham has been on my tour, and he knows it's fun, and he knows that I like it. And you must all come on my tour next year if you want. So that's what I want to get away from. Let's also talk about what camp life was like. Now, of course, you know, if you get a bunch, I think Mick Jagger once said, if you get a bunch of British men and you lock them up in the country house the weekend, sooner or later they'll all start putting on a skirt and a dress and larking around. And I think this just gives you an example. And what reason why I have this slide, as you can read, it says girls, 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 Stalag Luft III, March 43. So this is a year before the Great Escape. And one of the reasons showing this slide is that there are plenty of things to be getting on with in Stalag Luft III. You could do that, should you want to. But what I also want to show you is then how small those men are. Okay, so, and I think that, you know, I was at Winchester College earlier, thanks to you, Graham, and we saw in your office, as it were, we have Wavell's uniform. It's tiny. You know, I'm just, you know, and most of the uniforms, I'm sure here, you look at them, you know, and you know, when they were putting on these plays, they would be saying, oh, it seemed absurd that a massive 10-stone man could, you know, look like a woman. And you get 10-stone man today, as I put it to you, quite a small chap. But back then, if you were 10 stone, you were a big guy. And I think, you know, I think we've got to remember that people were smaller. Also, I want to give you a little idea of the geography of Stalag Luft III. This is one compound, okay, of a camp that by the end of the war stretches to that wall, and about 6-7 foot into that wall. Okay, this is a place which housed around 30 to 40,000 people of different nationalities. And so when we think about the Great Escape, we're only talking about one compound, okay, one relatively small compound. It is huge, okay, because obviously as the war went on, more and more people getting shot down, the camp has to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Luft refers to air, and Stammlager, this means it's a prison camp. So it's for basically shot down flyers, and it is run by the Luftwaffe. And obviously there was Stalag Luft, and Stalag Luft III doesn't mean that it's the third Stalag Luft. It just means that's the area it's in. Let's not go into that, as boring. Okay, and so what we're talking about when you think about the Great Escape, and obviously what we're going to be talking about is this hut here. And that is where the Great Escape Tunnel goes from. So I just want you to imprint this in your head. Okay, and then that's Harry, and we got Tom and Dick over here. Okay, so those are our 3 tunnels. And this whole place is carved out of a wood. Okay, and so you've got to imagine what it must be like for these poor chaps. They are, you know, they've been there, and as most of them are flyers, they have a very different kind of psychological shock when they're captured compared to if you're in the army. So say you're in the army and say you were captured in North Africa, and by the time you get to your prisoner of war camp somewhere in Europe, it's been weeks to get there, and you've adjusted to the idea of being a captive. If you were, say, a bomber pilot, you were shot down, and if you escaped with your life, you were shot down, and you landed. You were lucky not to get a pit stroke through you from the local farmer, and you ended up being in a prisoner of war camp within about 24 to 48 hours of you having a pint in the pub near Biggin Hill, or wherever it is you took off from. The psychological shock of that was absolutely enormous, absolutely enormous. Just going to scroll down on here. And you've also got to remember, so these guys, they've got that psychology, and they're also, this is the first time that a lot of them have been away from the UK, apart from flying over Berlin or whatever missions they've been on. They're very young. You know, I have a 22-year-old son, and that would be the typical age. I can't imagine him. He can't even drive a car, let alone fly a Spitfire. Guy Gibson was 24 when he did the Dams raid. I keep telling him, you've got to learn how to drive a car. And so you've got to imagine that you're there, you're a young man, you are stuck in the middle of a load of pines, in the middle of has anyone been to the site of the Great Escape apart from Graham? Right, well, you almost come because it's really boring. It is just endless flat forest, and it goes on for mile after mile after mile. It is so depressing. And of course, you know, you were, of course, guarded. Here, it's quite a nice thing. This is drawn by a man called Leigh Kenyon, Jan 44, so just 2-3 months before the Great Escape. And it shows you, first of all, the typical guard tower. You have here this little kind of post and rail affair. Now, if you stepped over that, you went into what was called the Löwengang, the Lion's Walk, because it meant if you stepped into that, that was like the kind of liminal bit, which meant, right, if you step there, that means you're escaping, I can shoot you. So that's why it's called the Lion's Walk. It took someone brave to go into that. But again, it's a lovely illustration, which I got at the RAF Museum in Hendon by Leigh Kenyon. And these guys, you know, excuse me, I'm just got a slight cold. They're away from home. They have no idea. And those who can't, those eyes can't read that. He's saying, of course, it's just like Mother used to make. Obviously, when they're back in Blighty, they've got good grub. When they're back at the camp, they have got what the Germans are giving them. And one of the things that the Germans used to give them was the thing called Fischkäse, fish cheese. And Fischkäse, fish cheese? Fischkäse was as disgusting as it sounded. And the recipe for fish cheese was to cook it in your stove for about 4 hours, smell it, and throw it out into the snow. It was horrible. So they had, it was very tough. They had to exist on Red Cross parcels, what the Germans gave them. And they were very relatively malnourished after a while. By our standards, definitely malnourished. And what does that happen? What does that mean? Yes, there was a sports pitch, as you could probably see back here. But the idea that you're going to play, 80, 90 minutes of rugby or football, that ain't going to happen. That ain't going to happen because that's just going to use up too many calories. You're just too tired. You're not fit enough to do this. And as we'll see when I talk about the escape itself, you realize one of the reasons why the escapers didn't get very far is they weren't that fit. They can't really exercise that much. They don't have the calorific intake they need. And the other thing that goes out the window, and again, this is in quite a few memoirs, is libido. Is that, they would some of the questions that interviewers would give them after the war is, how did you get on, thinking about sex and so on and so forth. They said all we could think about was grub. Okay, I think in the pecking order of what men want, sorry girls, you probably want a ham sandwich first. And so that was a massive part of it. And it's the whole idea that they're all kind of obsessing about girls all the time. So there is, it is psychologically extremely tough. And one of the tough things about being a prisoner of war, first of all, the word prisoner is what's important there. But if anybody's been, banged up in prison for, stealing things from their house, you get your year. You'll be out in 6 months. There's a time, right? These guys, there's no time. They're interned. I've just been reading a book about the IRA informer Frederick Scappaticci, and it's just there's this whole passage about internment and saying what a punishment it was. These IRA people, I'm not feeling sorry for them, and it was just. But they said the thing about internment is that it was an indefinite prison sentence, which was particularly tough to deal with, and obviously caused a lot more resentment. But and this is what the POWs felt, and also they turned up with a real sense of failure, because everybody who had been a POW, a lot of them had either just taken the wrong turn and got captured, or they'd done, hadn't seen the enemy come out the air, out the sun or whatever it was and attacking him, or they just had a bit of bad luck. But there was this sort of sense of, I screwed up somehow. And, and also was that sense of annoyance, especially for the career officers, those who'd been in the RAF before the war, was that they were aware that some of their fellow men were now getting promoted, they were getting medals, and they were having good wars. And of course, for you, if you're stuck in a POW camp, your war, you've atrophied. Your career is completely atrophied. And there is nothing else to do. And so what they do is, and actually the slide is up here for two reasons. So what you have to do is you have to try and divert yourself, try and keep busy. One thing will be escaping. I'll talk about that, don't worry. One of the other things to do is this is the fire pool in Colditz, which is, in Stalag Luft III, which is here. There you see there's a big sort of pond that the Germans built there to draw water in case there was a fire in one of the huts. And I love this slide because some of the chaps, they built these little model boats. One chap managed to bribe Germans to give him a whole load of copper coins. And out of it, somehow, he built a whole kind of New Orleans paddle steamer. And it took him about a year to build this thing. And it was powered by God knows what. And he puts it out on the de facto boating lake, the fire pool. And everyone's been aware this guy's been doing it. He's been working on it for a year. And he goes chug, chug, chug across the water. And then it just explodes. And it sinks to the bottom of the fire pool. And of course, this poor young chap, he's in tears. He spent the whole year. And of course, all the other lads are just laughing at him. And they just, it was just all these moments of banter. And as you can see, the other thing is the extraordinary dress sense that some of these young men are showing. I particularly like this chap's natty look here with the tie and socks and shorts or whatever it is. And they're all, as you can see, very slim. And I was going back to libido, and one of the questions that I also saw in various interviews, some they're asked about, about homosexuality, which I know seems like very much a present kind of thing that we're all interested in. But it was, and one of the responses was given was saying, well, if you were, I felt sorry for you because there was nowhere to do it. You would always be seen. And again, it's but I'll talk about the homosexual entrapment of one of the POWs. So you've got these young men, and they are all being looked after by the people, as you know, totally accurate in the film, they called the goons. Okay, now the goons are obviously the Germans, and I won't go through them all now, but that is your commandant, von Lindiner, a colonel who thought he should have been a general, like all colonels. Sorry, I'm not looking at anyone because I don't know what any of your ranks are. And so he's in charge of the camp. You've then got the ferrets, and one called Rubberneck, which you can see why, very long neck. The ferrets weren't Luftwaffe, they were Abwehr, German military intelligence. It was their job to search the huts, go underneath the huts, look for signs of escape kit, look for signs of tunneling, looking for all this sort of material. Then you've got this man, Gustav Simmerleit, who is the deputy to Lindiner. Simmerleit, as an academic, he was a linguist, and he was a good guy. These guys are mostly good guys, okay? And when he realised that one of the nationalities in the North Compound wasn't, all the letters obviously had to be censored, and the censorship office obviously could do French, they could do Polish, they could do British, English, so on and so forth. But it worked out that the Czechs weren't getting any mail home because no one in the censor's office could read Czech in order to translate it and censor it. So they decided, well, we're not going to bother. Czechs won't get their mail home. When he found out about this, he was so upset for the Czechs that he learnt Czech and then he censored the letters himself. So I think that gives you an idea of the kind of duty of care that these men are feeling. Average POW, early 20s. These guys, I'm 54, my age to the early 40s. Okay, so you've got that very much, I've just been in Winchester with you, you've got that kind of pupil and master kind of relationship going on here. And these Germans who are sophisticated, they're obviously 20, 30 years older, they've been around the world, they may have fought in the odd war perhaps, a previous quite big war. Some of them have been out in Africa, German colony, and so they've seen the world, and they look at these young men and they think they're so naive and they're so headstrong, and they feel, look, guys, we're just here to look after you. Let's not do anything silly here. And then you've also got this man here called Pieber, who was an Austrian Nazi, but he was, and I'm talking about the homosexuality, he was definitely gay, and what a place for him to work. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is I'll come on to how we got hold of all our escape kit, and it's thanks to Pieber's sexuality that some escape kit was got. Not something that appears in the film. So the big question as a POW is should I stay? In the words of The Clash, you know what the next slide's going to say. And if you stayed, you could have a good time. 2/3, as I said, Jimmy James, inveterate escaper, escapes from Stalag Luft III in The Great Escape, escapes from Sachsenhausen. It's his words, not mine. 2/3 of POWs did not want to escape. They said, right, you know what? I've been shot down. Has anyone here been in a plane crash? Exactly. Every man there had been in a plane crash, almost without exception. Okay, and if you've fallen out of the sky, you've been in a plane crash. Do you want to get in a plane again? Not really. Not really. And this is why with the bunks, if you there's a recreation in Zargan of the bunks. And the bunks started off 2 high, and then as the camp filled up, they made the bunks 3 high. Now, normally, I mean, I remember from my boarding school that you always wanted the top bunk, right? Because it gave you a sense of superiority over your fellow boy. And also it meant that you could fart on his head. And this is important, okay? And so having the top bunk gives you that kind of sense of superiority and all that. None of them want the top bunk. Why do they not want the top bunk? Because a common nightmare was falling out the sky. And invariably, they would roll out their bunks. And when you've got a triple bunk, that's a long way to fall and hit the ground. Okay, so you've got to remember that these guys, they don't want to get in a plane again. And they're also thinking, you know what? We are, as the crow flies from, the White Cliffs of Dover, about 600-700 miles. What is the chance of me getting all the way there? And what difference is that going to make to the war effort? And am I not safer here okay, it's a bit miserable, but I've got just about enough grub. I've got some quite good blokes I'm with. I can put on plays. That, by the way, is a Belgian fighter pilot called Bobby Lomans. And I interviewed a former Stalag Luft III inmate. He said, "Oh, he melted the hearts." And so you could put on plays and you could have a laugh. Anybody who is a fan of prog rock has heard of King Crimson? Anyone heard of? Yes. So Alfie Fripp is Robert Fripp's. Yeah. So there's a little. There's always someone who knows their prog rock. So good. Thank you, James. I'm glad you know that. But anyway, I interviewed him about it, and he gave me some of these slides. And so he actually was one of the few sergeant pilots in Stalag Luft III. Most of them were officers. One of the other problems is, of course, they're all officers, and under the Geneva Protocols, officers were not allowed to work. Right, so if you're an NCO, you are much psychologically better off. You could be working in a field, you could be working down a mine, perhaps. We put them to work in this country, and they put ours to work in the Third Reich. But it meant that you were getting out the camp every day. And also what was happening is that you were getting proper exercise by working, and I know I've mentioned libido, but you also could meet some of the local talent. There's a very good book called Thresholds of Peace, which is out of print now, which talks about the unforgotten part of British social history during the war, about the relationships that British women had with German POWs. And certainly that was going on. And so NCOs, they were getting out of the camp every day. They had a chance of meeting local women. And they felt that even though they were being productive in some way, were they helping the German war effort by working for them? Well, they didn't have any option because we were doing the same, and the Geneva Protocol allowed for it. So it wasn't a problem. Or the other thing is, should I go? I love this slide. This is a man called Johnny Dodge, Major Johnny Dodge, who is in Stalag Luft III. He is on the Great Escape, one of the few army officers as opposed to our flyers who's there. And I think those of you with reasonable eyesight can see there's a smirk, isn't there, on his face. And then you can see the smirk with this German, whatever rank he is, on the left. And he's just trying to get off a train, obs. And you can see that, he's been captured. Escaping, for people like that, it's a sport, and I think that there was a very famous leaflet put out by the Germans saying escaping has ceased to be a sport. But there is a type of man who goes, I'm not just going to bloody sit here for the next X years. I just want to do something. Okay. And I'm really sympathetic to that. Don't say that if I get out, I'm going to change the war effort. Don't say if 80 of us are going to get out, it's going to change the war effort. It's not, I'll tell you why it's not going to affect the Germans at all. Do it for your own sense of well-being. And if you want to study there's a book by Midge Gillies called Barbed Wire University, which I recommend. If you want to study your law degree, if you want to learn a language, if you want to do your accountancy exams in Stalag Luft, you could do all that. You want to learn a language, you could do that. There's lots and lots you could do, lots and lots you could learn. You've got a big camp, tens of thousands of people. You could be in the theatre. One of the guys there ends up in the Carry On films. So you've got so much you can be getting on with. And there's about a third want to escape, and they were called the Tally-Ho Brigade. And I think today we wouldn't call them the Tally-Ho Brigade. We'd just call them ruggerbuggers or, hearty Sloans wearing gilets, shuffles, the type. And they would be, hooray Henry types. That was kind of what that they felt like. And there was also, of course, there were class divisions within these camps between, the grammar school boys and the public school boys. And so, some of the worst elements of British society was very much encapsulated, especially in Colditz. That's another talk. So you've got this real sense of them and us between the Tally-Ho Brigade and those who want to stick around. And in another camp, because there was, once escapes were stymied, the Germans would sometimes issue some form of collective punishment for the entire camp populace by saying, well, no Red Cross parcels for a month. And obviously the 2/3 were getting quite annoyed about this and saying, look, you're doing all this escape stuff. It's not helping. Actually, we're getting fewer rations. So F you. And one guy, it's actually well recorded, got a tin can. He knew about lots of escape attempts. He wrote down all the escape attempts he knew that were going on, all the plans, put them in a tin can, sealed the tin can, and chucked it into the German side of the camp. I mean, that's treachery. You probably would have got more than beaten up for doing that. But I think it tells you that it's not this kind of homogenous gang of daring do escapers all wanting to have a go against the Hun. You know, it's not that simple. It really isn't that simple. So anyway, so these are your options. Should I say, or should I go? So we're talking about a third of the POWs. And then along turns up your father's friend, Mr. Stanford Tuck, Roger Bushell, played by Dickie Attenborough in the movie, of course. Played pretty well. Bushell was a really, really interesting and I think a really controversial figure. I think the hagiographic version of the Roger Bushell character is he was a redoubtable, he was a squadron leader. Millionaire Squadron, whichever one was that, 601, I always forget. And he, before the war, had been a barrister. He used to sort of fly up to courts in Chester. He used to sort of hang out with a very, very fast crowd in London, sports cars, clubs, girls. He was a big, hearty guy. He spoke a lot of languages very well. He was a really good skier, and that's how he ends up with this weird eye, because he cut his eye really badly in a skiing accident. He was South African. His father had made a fortune out of mining. He'd gone to Wellington here in Britain, and he had then gone to Cambridge, where he took almost the worst third anybody has ever taken in law. But that's because he spent most of his time going skiing and basically pissing around. And if you look at the letters home, is his father saying, I can't believe how much money you've spent. I've got to bail you out again. Blah, 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 blah. Your tailor's bill on Savile Row is insane. You know, he's literally that type of guy. But saying that, you know, he is a very dynamic, what we today call alpha male. Absolutely. 10th of May, 1940, first day of operations against the enemy. He's shot down. That is not what Roger Bushell's war should be about, is being shot down on day one. He was 28, a little bit older than average, squadron leader. That is not. So he ends up in a succession of POW camps, from where he successfully makes many escapes, gets as close as the Swiss border, as far away as the end of the room. He's been super frustrated. He's also been in hiding in Prague for months. He's said to have been tortured by the Gestapo. It's never clear. But he's certainly got, when he turns up, and this is him before the war, that's him in his first POW camp. You see, he's quite a big figure, quite jolly, quite stocky, quite a smiley, very charismatic individual, no doubt about that. And he turns up and he says, you know what we're going to do? I am now what's going to be called Big X. And I am now in charge of all the escape attempts in this camp. The senior British officer has designated that to me because I'm such an experienced escaper, got this amazing reputation, basically almost a bit of a celeb, we'd call him now. And we're going to do our bit to really make a difference to put this escaping onto a professional footing. Until then, escapes have been very much as an ad hoc thing. I'm sure that most of you know about the wooden horse escape. I don't have time to talk about that, but that had happened. Great movie. That if you come on my tour, that site has been cleared, and we can talk about that when we come to Poland in April. And he decides, well, we're going to do not just one bluff but two bluffs. We're going to build 3 tunnels. And let's just go back very quickly to where those tunnels are, just to remind you of them. Tom is the one closest to the perimeter at the time. A new compound is going to be built here. So Tom, obviously, that's super near. Germans are probably going to work that one out. Why would you dig a tunnel like for miles when you can do it right next to the boundary? Dick, similarly, pretty near, and we could do one there. And then we're also going to do this one, Harry, which hopefully we're never going to have to use because we'll just pop out of Tom, no probs. That's going to be easy. And you've got everything in the movie about how those tunnels are built is accurate. Okay, so the bedboards being used to shore it up, absolutely true. Those are all bedboards from the bunks, and so of course eventually, just like in the film, your slats in your bunk got fewer and fewer, and you had to decide whether your bum was going to hang through your head or your feet. Everybody basically started getting a rubbish night's sleep from then on. As you can see from here, it's very sandy. And if you've been there, and one of the reasons why the camp was there, not just because it was near a big railway junction, which makes it easier to get prisoners to, But also they thought, well, if we build a camp in a very sort of sandy environment, it's going to be really hard to tunnel from. Now, I want to tell you about something they don't have in the film about tunneling. Okay. And this is horrible. So shut your ears if you feel that you get offended, but it is horrible. The tunneling basically takes place like this. You've got one guy in front of you who's scraping out the sand. It's quite easy to tunnel through sand, right? But you've got to shore it up. There's always a chance it might collapse. So that's obviously an ever-present fear. Amazingly, nobody dies digging tunnels at Stalag Luft III. It's just incredible to think, because imagine how tall is this room? Like 10 foot, right? So make that 30 foot of sand on top of you, and now tunnel through something about the size of the seat of your chairs. And now make that run for 333 feet. And it's about 2'6" across. And about 2'6", right? I mean, if you're claustrophobic, not a hope. Okay, not a hope. But the tunneling is really, really horrible, because obviously what you're not going to do is tunnel in your Sunday best, because you're going to get sand and sweat and everything like that. So you're just going to tunnel in a loincloth. And then you're one chap's ahead, and you've got one chap behind who's getting rid of all the spoil and sending it down this trolley system, where it will then be dispersed into people's. And they had lots of flower beds. They used to grow tomatoes and plants and things. So it'd be dispersed, under the huts, or wherever it could be dispersed. But they then decided there's just no point in wearing loincloths. I mean, that's just a waste of time. They just get dirty and have to wash them. So let's just do it naked. All right. Well, if you're the guy in front, that's not so bad, is it? If you're the guy behind, what's your view for 6 hours down this tunnel? It's his, backside, meat and two veg right in front of your face. But it gets worse. Because their rations were so bad, they had very loose bowels. And so, obviously, there's no convenient gents down there, with a hand dryer, a Dyson hand dryer, nothing like that. You're just going to have a crap or a pee right there. So what you're doing is, for 6 hours, you are tunneling through sand that's about to collapse with another man's arse right in your face, out of which things are happening. And you've got to tunnel through that for hours at a time. It stinks. It is horrible. It is really unhygienic. It is not for the squeamish. They don't put that in the film. And I can see why, despite glorious Technicolor. Also here, each tunnel had a kind of workshop. There's a whole little workshop, like the size of like a big cubicle, which tools would be made, and then they would make all the bits of trolleys and the wheels and all this stuff. Some of it was obtained by bribery, some of it was just made. You had a line of air pumps, a line of tins stuck together, powdered milk tins, provide air. The flaps on that ventilation machine would be taken from table tennis bats, rip the rubber off a table tennis bat and use that as a flap. Again, all this stuff, it's not invented by the Great Escapers. It's all been used in previous escapes, because the war has now been on for 5 years. And there's been, as people have been moved from camp to camp, they are, radiating the information about how to do this stuff. And also a lot of First World War escape memoirs, which these boys read when they were young. They had read some of these techniques in the First World War memoirs. So they had learnt it from there. What I also want you to look at is this. This is, again, a sketch by Leigh Kenyon, is Roger Bushell. Look at that face. Look at that face and how that has changed from that jolly, burly chap to what he looks like in 1944. That downturned mouth. This is a man on a mission. Okay, this is a man on a mission. And there's the German here says the big criminal. The Germans called him the big criminal. They know he's up to no good. Okay, but you can really see the difference in that face. And he was liked by those. It sounds really fatuous. He was liked by those who liked him, but those who didn't like him really didn't like him. And there's one example in which he goes into a hut, and there are a bunch of chaps just lying on a bed, just doing bugger all. And he says, "Right, you need to do something. You need to do something. You need to do something." And I said, "Well, I don't have to do anything." No, you need to. You need to do this. And a lot of them described him as being, "Are there any lawyers in here?" Good. And a lot of them described him as being very lawyerly. Okay, and I assume they didn't mean that in a positive way. Okay, and there was something very didactic about him. There was something that a lot of people, he rubbed people up the wrong way. He expected to get exactly what he wanted all the time, and even though he did have a sense of charisma, sometimes he really didn't use it. And so I think it's a really, really problematic thing. And now I want to talk about his big idea that he was going to open up a new front inside Germany. And this is just showing you the tins, Klim tins. That's surprising the airline. There's the pump. This is obviously after the escape. The idea that you are going to open up a whole new front inside Germany by doing a great escape. Okay, this is one of the big enduring myths of the escape. You are going to cause so much hassle to the Germans, you're actually going to affect the war effort. Okay, it's just not true. It's just not true. And why is it not true? First of all, there were great escapes in devices from SS men. There was a great escape in Newport by Germans. Doesn't affect the British war effort. Who are we going to use to round up people escaping in Britain? Well, we're going to use the police. We're going to use the Dad's army. We're going to use any troops who happen to be stationed in the country at the time. We're going to use whoever's here. You're not pulling people off the front line to come and to come and hunt for POWs. And the Germans did exactly that. They just used whatever people were on call in the area to do the searching. Okay, so you're not affecting the war effort. These people aren't doing anything else. Okay, you're using Hitler Youth. In fact, it's Hitler Youth who capture most of the great escapers because keen little teenagers, nasty little teenagers. The worst type of deputy prefect. And so it doesn't affect the German war effort in that way. Is it a pain? It's a bit of a pain, but it doesn't affect the German war. It's not opening a new front inside Germany by doing this. Also, it gets worse. What the Germans did whenever there was an escape, they would do what was called just an alarm, a Fahndung. And then when there was a great escape, and there were a lot of mass breakouts, they would do a Großfahndung, a big alarm. And that would mean that every bridge would then get a troop on it. Would get someone on it. Every station would have its security doubled. Everything would just be much tighter. Everything would be tighter. Okay, and manpower would be used. Resting manpower would be used to achieve this. There was a mass escape from another camp by the Brits in 1943. And how did that escape? I think 43 Brits got out. There was a Großfahndung, general alert put around the Third Reich. Okay, under that enhanced security dragnet, 8,000 escapees got captured. Right, and most of them would not have been captured had it not been for that. So a lot of these guys were escaping Russian prisoners. A lot of them perhaps are escaping actual criminals. A lot of them are other, POW escapers. So what you've got is blowback, ladies and gentlemen. What you're doing is you're making it harder for other escapers all over the Third Reich. So if you're a foreign worker, a forced labourer trying to get back to Oslo, right, and your papers are a bit dodgy, well, you're now going to be a bit screwed because thanks to this great escape, there's this enhanced security. So a station you could have got through perfectly all right has now got some snotty Hitler Youth who's saying, you spelt Leipzig wrong, or something like that. So it makes it worse. And the Germans told Bushell and the other senior officers, this is what is going to happen. Okay? And we're telling you this in a kind of camaraderie way. Sorry, I can't say that. In a comradely way, we're telling you this. And Pieber says to them, and this is all in the National Archives and the German Archives, there was a meeting, minuted, says, we know you're trying to escape. You're going to make it a lot easier for yourselves if you do it in 2s and 3s. Don't do a mass escape because you're gonna get this. Then call it blowback then, but we'll call it blowback now. And they say the other problem, and this is like mid to late 1943, is that the Gestapo are wanting to start taking control of recaptured POWs. Now, everybody in this room knows what the Gestapo are like. Everybody in those rooms knew what the Gestapo were like. And you're thinking, so what's the point of doing this? What is the point of doing this? I'm not going to get back home, realistically. If I do get back home, it's going to make it a war effort. If we all escape, 200 of us down this tunnel, which is Bushell's idea, 200 of us escape, that's just going to ruin it for everybody else. So what is the point of doing this? If we do want to escape, get out in 2s and 3s. That's okay. But don't do a mass escape. It is counterproductive. And even if you think it's opening a new front inside Germany, it simply doesn't. Okay? It just doesn't open a new front. You're not pulling people back from, Leningrad to come and hunt for POWs. It's just not going to happen. I like this slide here. This shows you some of the security that was used. When people say there were no, you all knowledgeably say, well, we know there were no Yanks on the Great Escape. Well, there were Yanks involved in the Great Escape because there was a man called Clark who was called Big S in charge of the security of the Great Escape in the North Compound. He was a Yank. And he was in charge of organizing how the security worked. So this says kitchen watch, yellow warning, any goon approaching block, give man on trap, yellow, red warning. I'm not too sure what the red, green and yellow is referred to there, but I know that one of the things of doing it, some bloke would be, smoking a pipe, it's outside a hut. A German would be walking into the compound. He would just change the pipe to one side of his mouth to the other. That, of course, would be seen by a bloke in a hut over there who would just tap something there. And then within 5 seconds, the chaps down the tunnel knew just to stop doing it. So that was how the security worked. And the Germans would, they knew the stuff was going on. They would often drive lorries around the compound, to try and collapse tunnels. They would, they would do as much as they could. And they also had a whole system of underground microphones, and which was there to detect tunneling. And at one point they did hear some noise, but they thought it was coming from a coal store, so they ignored it. And then one day, when they're wiring up the new neighbouring compound, they had to disconnect the wiring system in the north compound, and they were disconnecting it, and the electrician who came in, literally an electrician, typical electrician, forgot to reconnect the microphones in the north compound. So for the last 2 years of the war, the microphones weren't even working. Also, Germans, yes, they all had rifles up in their guard huts. A lot of them didn't have any ammunition in their rifles because of shortages. So a lot of them were bluff. You could have just walked out the camp half the time. And so it was just extraordinary. And also the other thing you've got to remember about the guards, and I think that in any system in which the prison population are richer than those who guard them, you're going to get corruption. What's the currency in a POW camp? It's cigarettes. Okay? Average POW has got about 10 fags a day. Okay? It's quite a lot. Average German, 2. Okay, so you're 5 times richer than the people guarding you. Okay, so therefore, you are going to be able to bribe these guys very, very easily. And a lot of the guards are pretty elderly. One RAF officer calls them the usual rabble of the lame and the halt. Okay, they were pretty physically unimpressive specimens. And so as a result, they were being bribed left, right, and centre. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go on to the passes. This is a lovely picture, again by Leigh Kenyon, an original in the RAF Museum. All the Kriegies, the POWs, were given little books that they could draw in. This obviously was drawn in his book after the escape, because otherwise it would have been pretty bad security if the Germans looked through his book and saw that little picture. Okay, but that gives you a really good idea of what the tunnel was like. There it is, block Hut 104. One of the other tunnels had basically got busted, by the way. So I think it was Tom. And then when the Germans said, well, we found this tunnel, so we're now going to blow it up. So they put a load of dynamite or whatever explosive it is down there. Everyone's standing around to watch it. And of course, what the Germans don't realize, if you put explosives in a tunnel, you're going to get a rifling effect. And it just, all the shock of the charge just went straight up into the hut and blew the entire roof off, which the POWs loved because it gave them something to laugh at. The Germans had blown up one of their own huts. Anyway, but you can see the tunnel just like in the film, about 100 meters, 330 foot long. You got 2 halfway houses, Piccadilly Circus and Leicester Square, and then it emerges in the woods. And we'll talk about that night of the escape. Forgery. Now, were papers forged? Yes, but not in the way that's in the film, right? So Donald Pleasance, going blind. It's really hard to handwrite printed matter successfully. I mean, that little sign here, just handwrite that sign and make it look like it's printed. It's really difficult to do, almost impossible. So one way they would do it would be they would make a kind of a jello press out of melted down sort of jelly. They're getting Red Cross parcels. They would bribe the guards to get hold of the original passes. They would copy them, stencil them with the jello press, and then print them like that. Very basic. But in order to type the words onto it, they bribed a German and they said, "Oi, could you Doris do this back in Frankfurt when you're next on leave?" And so there was a German housewife who was responsible for typing up most of the passes using the Great Escape. Okay, so clothes, currency, passes, all this was obtained largely by bribery. Some of the British officers thought, no, we don't like this bribery. It's not very gentlemanly. Bushell thought, balls to that, we're bribing them. Okay, and there's blackmail, extortion, and sometimes the Germans would be so German. Sorry, I'm called a German, I would say this. They sometimes say, right, if I give you these all these cigarettes, will you give me a receipt? You know, well, can I give you a receipt? Yeah, I have a receipt. Right, receipt. Great. Now I bribed you. You've got a receipt that you've received. Idiot. And so this is why, you know, you get in the RAF's official report saying we could not have done the escape without the Germans. We couldn't. They were our biggest helpers. And I say in my book that this is the most successful Anglo-German cooperation since the marriage of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Okay, I mean, you know, so this stuff, this is an original forged template in the RAF Museum in Hendon. You know, this stuff, clothing, right? Really hard to get that right. Okay, sometimes you have your civilian clothes sent from home. So that's why you'll see, especially in quite a few POW pictures, a lot of them wear cricket jumpers, their favourite cricket jumper, and so on and so forth. These are 3 of the escapers who were captured by the Kripo Criminal Police on the Great Escape. Squadron leader Katanov, got the other 2 names. They're wearing, you know, what look like, you know, UK military greatcoats in some way. Some of them still had, you know, David Anderson of, you know, Savile Row still inside. They've got to unpick them. You know, so there, a lot of these, they were identified literally by having Savile Row coats. A lot of them, you know, over here, shortages meant that people weren't wearing hats so much, but typically your average German civvy was probably still wearing his favorite old battered hat that he still had. None of them had hats. It's very hard to make a hat. That briefcase made out of cardboard. So again, very easily, why is your suitcase made out of cardboard? So once, you know, and one of the other reasons, you know, why they were so easy to spot some of the passes just have basic mistakes in them. But anyway, let's go on to the night of the escape itself. 24th, 25th of March, you've got 200 men all in hut. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're good. You got about 200 men all in hut 104. Okay, and you've got Bushell disguised as a French businessman. You've got someone disguised as an Irish officer because Ireland was neutral. Irish officers you had a lot of Irish in Berlin. So if you could pose as an Irishman, that was a good excuse. You had some people disguised as, most of them disguised in civvies. And just like in the film, the Steve McQueen character, in fact, a man called Leslie Bull, goes down to the end of the tunnel, and any of you in the military will always tell me that your plan goes out the window as soon as the first shot's fired. Well, this is exactly what happens here. So the tunnel, they think, right, we've got it at the right distance, we hope. We're going to go to the end of the tunnel. We're going to like poke our noses. We've got this little trapdoor sort of like contraption, a bit like this. Going to shove that up, and then it's going to get us out. Leslie Bull goes down, and it's really cold for March. Okay, Poland's always cold, but you know, and it's really cold, and it's wedged shut because of the expansion and contraction of this wooden contraption. It's now just expanded, and it takes him about an hour to de-wedge it. Anyway, so Leslie Bull sticks his head out, a bit like Steve McQueen the movie, and goes, "Shit, we have fallen about 20 feet too short." Okay, now that's just like in the film. Now in the film, that's a huge problem. Okay, and in the book, you know, The Great Escape, that's a huge problem. That's by Paul Brickhill written. He was in the camp. You know what? At the time, you read all the MI9 reports of all the people, it's barely mentioned. It's just barely mentioned. They just said, you know what? There's snow on the ground. We're about 15 foot away from the trees anyway. The guard tower nearby is facing the other way. You know what? It's not a real problem. Let's just crack on. Let's just crack on. And I've worked out by cunning use of Google Maps and this aerial picture from the war, and I've worked out that basically the tunnel emerges about there. The trees are there. And you've got these kind of screens, which the Germans use for spying on prisoners, like hedges. So you've got these little hedges you can run behind. And you've got there the guard tower. There's a shadow making it look, you know, longer than it is. Guard tower there, tunnel emerges there, trees are there. In the snow, in the middle of the night, you're fine. It's not a problem. They tie a rope, just tug the rope when it's good to go. But of course, things go wrong. Basically, so this is, I love this. So you designed the London Underground. This is an American prisoner anticipating, you know, the problems of the escape in his day book. But anyway, so you've got, and the next thing that's going to go wrong is, first of all, okay, it falls a bit short, but we can deal with that. Okay, we started a bit late. We can deal with that. Okay. Oh no. Why have the lights gone out in the tunnel? Right, the load of electric lights in the tunnel. Why have they gone out? Because the RAF is bombing Berlin 100 miles northwest. And it means the Germans have just cut all the power in the surrounding area. So now the tunnel is now plunged into darkness at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so what do you do? Well, they've got homemade tallow lamps, tallow candles. So now you're trying to chuck 200 men down a thing about that big, with fire in it. Okay, so that's a bit of a disaster. And the other thing that goes wrong is that, as you know from the movie, they have to pull each other through, and then you send the trolley back, and you do that. Quite a few of them forget to do it. So it means that one guy's then got to crawl all the way to go and get it up, right? Sidney Dow's, one of the great escapers, says, I was waiting 25 minutes in the tunnel for this bloody trolley because the bloke just decided to leg it and not send the trolley back. Okay, so you've got, that stuff. Do people have panic attacks? One person thinks they do. I think it's unlikely because anybody who was designated to go down the tunnel, they were told to go and have a look at it first. And if you don't want to go down that tunnel, tell me now, because I don't want you getting claustrophobic during the escape. If you're claustrophobic, don't go. Okay, so you got that memo. So, right, it's fine. And so that was a really important. Now, apparently some guy had a panic attack. I'm not too sure, but it's not unlikely. It's not unlikely. 25 minutes, 30 foot underground in something 2 foot by 2.6. I would have a panic attack, no doubt. But nevertheless, by about 4:30 in the morning, 80 men are getting out. Okay, it's not 200, 80 men are getting out. And what you've got to imagine, at about 4:30, 5 o'clock, it's starting to get just a little few wisps of brightness. Dawn is coming up. And the German's walking on the perimeter road. And what does he see? What does he see? He sees this plume of condensation coming out of the hole because of all the body heat coming off all these guys, the steam. So it's like a sort of a whole sort of bonfire going off. And he sees standing around this hole 4 men. And of course, the first thing he does is, he basically fires off a shot into the air. And I think Squadron Leader Revel Carter, who says, he thinks he's saying don't shoot in German. He thinks he's saying Nick schießen. And what he actually says is Nick scheißen, don't shit. And of course, this causes the other guys to start laughing. But anyway, so the 4 who are there, some of them scarper off into the woods, but the 4 around the entrance tunnel are they're arrested straight away. Okay, but that's fine. They're great escapers. They got out the tunnel. Okay, they didn't get much further than that door, but they still got out the tunnel, so they count. So 80 people got out the tunnel that night. And then they all run through. And on my tour, I take you on the route that people go through the woods. We follow the route they took. And you get, in the MI9 debrief, some really, really conflicting accounts of what happened. So Bob van der Stok, one of the successful escapers, he says in his memoirs, I went through the woods. It's about 2 a.m. I was going as a Dutch foreign labourer because he was Dutch, so he could pose as someone who's Dutch. And he goes, this German soldier came up to me, pointed a rifle at my chest and said, where are you going? So I'm going to the station. He said, okay, that's fine. In a moment of drama. Read his MI9 debrief. He says, I went through the woods with nothing eventful happen. Just made it up. Okay. So there's a problem with, if you write these books, you've got a great escaper who's basically made up a crock of rubbish, in his book, and you've got to unpeel that. And you think, but you're a great escaper. You're a hero. You did a brilliant thing. You got back to Britain. But why did you have to make that up? Why did you make that up? And where about a third of the 80 go, or maybe a little bit more than that, is the station here at Zagan, which again, I like going to take people to show them. There's the ticket office where they all went and bought their tickets. Now you imagine 2, 3, 4 in the morning, you're thinking, surely it's a bit weird to turn up at the station, but people were traveling all the time. Okay, at night in the middle of the war, trains were going all the time. People were, mothers of children were there. 2, 3 in the morning. So this was a busy ticket hall. But of course, they're escaping in 2s and 3s, and obviously they've all got to pretend they don't know each other. Not catching eye contact with Bob over there or Roger over there, all pretending not to know each other. And of course, the other problem is that some of the clerical staff who work at the camp, there was a secretary who worked in the census office, and she's looking at one of them and going, I know you from somewhere. I think I better get that train. And so the guys who've got the best chance of escaping are the guys going by train. They're given the best passes, the best uniforms, the most currency, and they are basically said, right, you got the chance of getting away. Who are they? They are typically not Brits. They are only 50% of the Great Escape is British, by the way. They are Poles, they're Czechs, they're Latvians, they are Norwegians, they're Dutch. They are people who are part of the Third Reich. Okay, so they're allowed to be in the Third Reich. They can just say, I'm a foreign labourer. I'm going back home on a bit of leave. Okay, they're allowed to be. And also, and a lot of Brits, weren't given the kind of the role of going on the trains because A lot of Brits, we're not very good linguists, largely, okay? And it's very hard to pretend you're mute, okay, all the time. It's not, it doesn't really convince anybody. Very few people are mute, I put it to you. And also British people can look quite British, right? I mean, there's a guy called Desmond Plunkett who's on The Escape, and I don't have a picture of him, but Desmond Plunkett, I should have a picture of him, but Desmond Plunkett looks very much like a man called Desmond Plunkett. And Desmond Plunkett, you know, and you just look at his face, you go, hey, you can't pass for anybody German when he was escaping, the guy called Danny Kroll, he was standing at a urinal, you know, in a gents, and after tips off his face, goes, oh, that's better, and they're like, this German next to him goes, off we go, yeah, and it's like, so, you know, there's just, you know, it's amateur hour. So most of them are what's called hard-arsing. Okay, so this is the scenery that you start to get. It's a really nice part of the world, Silesia. But what you have to imagine is this is all covered in snow, and about 2/3 of them are basically slogging it through the snow. It's about, I've got the weather charts from the time, about 0, -1, +1. It's that terrible weather where it snowed about a week ago, and now it's freezing and refreezing. It's getting muddy and icy, and it's just horrible. And then they don't have the right kit, okay? Jimmy James said he was escaping in his desert trousers. He was wearing chinos, you know? No Gore-Tex, you know, no posh boots. They were just escaping in very basic kit. So they were hopelessly ill-prepared. And so, and these are some of the stations that we go to. Some of them go to stations. Most of the great escapers are rounded up in 24 hours within about 4 miles of the camp. Okay, some even give themselves up because they're absolutely frozen. And even Jimmy James says, you know, there was a real risk of death. You know, the weather was against us. There was no way on earth that you could just walk for hundreds or tens or 30s or 20s of miles through this. It was just impossible, absolutely impossible. So many of them give themselves up, and they get captured. And I'm aware we're slightly running out of time, so apologies. They get captured often by the criminal police. That's Squadron Leader Williams and Ozzy. And you can see how incredibly unhappy they look, as well you might. But they just said there was just no chance. But they don't think they're going to be killed. They then get taken to Görlitz, very nice town, go to my tour, where they get interrogated, not by this man, that's a man called Günther Absalon. His job is to interrogate the Germans. And he interrogates the Germans, and he walks into Germans' flats and apartments in Zagan, opens up their cupboards, chocolate and fags raining down, Red Cross, you know, Canadian, Americans, you know, okay, you're going to prison. Okay, so the biggest, you know, kind of like, you know, a lot of Germans arrested and imprisoned for their role in the Great Escape. They were in more trouble than the Brits and the other nationalities. A lot of the prisoners were taken here to Görlitz HQ, and there's that line in the film where the Gestapo also goes, oh, Bartlett. And that is now a block of flats. And when I take people there, they always look out the window and go, why are you bringing 25 middle-aged British men to look at our perfectly nice apartment block in Görlitz? And I said, well, it's because this is the story. And they were basically told, we think you're spies. And because you're spies, that means you're going to get shot, because that's what happens to spies. And we've shot spies all the time, or hanged them, or whatever he did. And Hitler was very angry about the Great Escape, because about 2 or 3 days before, there had been an attack in Rome of 33 an SS police battalion, and he ordered a thing called the reprisal, which took place in the Argentine caves. Ratio of 10-1, 335 people got shot in the back of the head in the cave as a reprisal for this essentially terrorist attack on an SS police battalion. He then says, right, just shoot all these escapers. It's just annoying. Not because it's like ruining the war effort, it's just ruining his day. Goering says at Nuremberg, I talked him down to 50 because I'm a terrific guy. So the Zagen order goes out, and this is what happens. Again, this is obviously a recreation by the RAF Special Investigation Branch. Typically, after being recaptured, they'd be either the Kripo, criminal police, hand them over to the Gestapo. Gestapo would say, we're going to drive you back to the camp. Do you want to have what the Germans call a Pinkelpause, a pee stop? And if while you're having a Pinkelpause, that happens. This is what happens to Roger Bushell. Bushell is shot by that man there. And Bushell, again, with Emil Scheidhauer. I'm getting near the end now, so if you're getting hungry, I'm near the end. Bushell is captured with a man called Emil Scheidhauer, who was a free French pilot. And you know, in the film, when Gordon Jackson responds in English to the Gestapo officer when they're on the bus, he goes, "Good luck," and he goes, "Thank you." And of course, it's not. And he's escaping with Bartlett, aka Bushell. And so everyone thinks that basically it's poor Emil Scheidhauer, who, when questioned by a member of the Kripo on their train near Saarbrücken on the other side of Germany about 3 days later, this Kripo officer, a man called Fritz Bender, funny name, Fritz Bender puts in his report, which is in Kew, National Archives, and says, "I was very confused because one of the men responded to my questions in English." And you're going, well, who's going to respond to your questions in English? Is it going to be Emil Scheidhauer, the French speaker? Or is it going to be Roger Bushell, who's Anglophone? Okay, he speaks languages. Tired, stressed. I think it was Bushell. And this is what happens to Bushell. Bushell is taken to the side of the road with Scheidhauer, and they're shot quite near Ramstein Air Base, if you know that. And the killers are eventually brought to justice, but not all of them. That's another story I won't tell now. The bodies are cremated. The death certificates are filled in before they're even killed. German efficiency. And they are taken to sometimes local concentration camps. This is Natzweiler in the kind of Alsace, Strasbourg area. And then the urns are all sent back to the camp. And of course, you can imagine the effect on morale of that taking place. 3 men get away, 2 Norwegians. And this is Bob van der Stok, my Dutch bullshitter. He takes him 3 months to get all the way down to Gibraltar. And then he's flown back to Bristol. The 2 Norwegians, Fuglsang and Muller, they are in Gothenburg in 48 hours in Sweden. They go to the British consulate there, and he says, "We're 2 POWs. We want to seek shelter here at the British Embassy." And he goes, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "No, we don't want a cup of tea. Want something a bit stronger than that. We've just escaped from a POW camp." Anyway, they are then the following day put on a pair of mosquitoes, and they land in RAF Lucas. So in 72 hours, they have got to the UK. Brilliant escape. They managed to get there, make their way, I think. So 3 home runs. So the final slide, was it worth it? You know what? I mean, I've been quite negative quite a lot of the time. And I've sort of thought, you know what, the whole thing's kind of counterproductive, you know, doesn't blow back and so on and so forth. But you know what? I'm very sympathetic. And just to finish, the words of Sidney Dowes, and he was recaptured after 12 days on the run. And he was asked, "Why did you do the escape, Sidney?" This is sometime after the war. And he said, "You know what? I just wanted to see a little bit more of Germany before the war ended." It's a pretty good reason in my book. And so that is the tomb to the Great Escapers, built by the prisoners during the war with material supplied by the commandant. And you know, why do we go there? So yeah, the Great Escape. Was it great? Yes, in many ways it was. Was it an act of folly, military madness, as one POW puts it? It probably was as well. History is complicated. It's both of those things. Thank you. Now, I know I've spoken for far too long, so I will not be offended if anybody wants to run away if they've got a table booked or something like that. But if you want to stay, please do. But yeah,
There's time for some questions.
time for some questions. But if you want to go now, I won't be
If I can
offended.
ask you to stick your hand up.
Yes,
speak into this.
and then you need a microphone because you're going to be on the internet forever, not OnlyFans.
Again. Do you think one of the reasons they made a film of this because so many got shot? I mean, with other great escapes, did they murder as many people?
No. So the reason why, and I should have gone into the murder a bit more. So 50 got shot, and of course it wasn't like in the movie when they all get mowed down, you know, in the field collectively. And I can see the reason for that artistic license. There hadn't been. This was a remarkable crime. Okay, the Germans obviously committed genocide. You know, so numerically, of course, you know, in terms of the war and the acts of German, you know, genocide, it pales into significance. This was known about in Britain within days. Okay, and it was in the House of Commons. There was a memorial service at the church in Trafalgar Square. What's it called? Anyway, I can't remember. St Martin in the Fields, and so it was, you know, unlike kind of those massacres you have at Malmedy and things like that early on in the war, and stuff like Jochen Piper and all those sort of people. This was really out there as an act of murder. The terrible effect was, and again, I didn't quite talk about the duty to escape. There's no duty to escape in the King's regulations. Okay, it just says you've got to evade capture. Right, and so a lot of them said, I don't have any duty to escape. Okay, there's a kind of corporate duty to be brave, to maybe do your bit, but you've got no real duty to escape. That's what a lot of prisoners say they have to. And what it did was it caused London to basically, through basically coded channels, to say to POWs, look, just don't bother. It's not worth it. Everyone knows, especially, by mid to late 44, which way the war's going. So no, there weren't, yes, were Russian prisoners massacred? Yeah, all the time. You better believe it. Were British and Polish and Czech and Norwegian officers massacred? No, they really weren't. It was an exceptional crime. And that is one of the reasons why the story is what it is. Hence my third slide. It's because it's the murder. Yes, sir. You have to wait for the microphone, I'm afraid, because you're going to be online.
A good friend of mine lent me a book which his father had written, an autobiography. Father was in the army and was captured at Tobruk, and describes the process of being taken as a POW with others and dragging their way up through Italy with trains stopping and going on and
yes,
all the way up through Italy to eventually to a prison camp in Germany. And nowhere in that book does that man mention one moment the possibility of escape. Their sole interest is getting more food, and overcoming boredom.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that talking about boredom, just to pick up your point, thank you, is that, obviously now today we're much more sympathetic to mental health and emotional issues and all that. And right. Then, of course, it was, a tougher world if you had mental problems. But even then, so the Red Cross would used to come and visit the camps, and there was some quite early psychological evaluation, of these prisoners, and the boredom, the lethargy was, it was recognised as being really troubling for some. So they used to make men move huts, move compounds, just get a bit of social variety. If you read Mickey Burns' book, Yes, Farewell, which is a novel set in Colditz, and Mickey Burns, a Wykamist, he published a book called Yes, Farewell in 1946, in which he describes, and when I'm in Colditz, I read from it. When he describes life in Colditz, it is unremittingly psychologically horrific. And he says that the men lay around like neutered cats, and the smallest thing. So you drop a bit of rubbish on the floor and you just look at it and you go, yeah, well, I'll pick it up later. He said that's how lazy people got. They just had nothing else to think about. So that boredom you mentioned is really important. Any more? I know that I've overrun. Well, the lady here, then we'll come to you. Yeah.
I just wonder, you said it was known about in Britain, the murders, very soon afterwards. How? How was it?
Oh, well, first of all, so the Red Cross would have learnt about it, very much so, because the Red Cross were constantly visiting the camp. It was also, people wrote it, but sent letters home. It was known about in that way. So yeah, it was well known. And
nobody believed the shot while trying to escape.
No one believed the shot while trying to escape. No one believed it. And it's because everyone knows that, if someone's pointing a rifle at your back, you stop running. So yeah, no, it was known very, very quickly. And the gentleman there again, yeah, well, let's have another.
Yeah, do you find it frustrating having to overcome the history by Hollywood and the general public perception that it engenders?
I do a bit, which is why I sort of do talks like this all the time and write books and appear on telly and things. And I do find it a bit frustrating. It's very easy to get very sanctimonious and pious about how accurate films are, any historical film. And I can see there are egregious things like Braveheart, and then the one about the Yanks, I don't know, stealing the Enigma machine or whatever it is. All that sort of stuff. It's when something is so the movie The Great Escape. It's sort of fine, Everyone knows that there's Steve McQueen stuff is all rubbish, but it's I think. There is a producer in America who does want to buy my book to make into a series and do a gritty warts and all kind of Great Escape thing. And I'd love that to happen. Obviously, maybe a lot of money. That motivates me probably more than the truth. But I do find it a bit frustrating. But at the same time, I don't know, if I watch a history film from a period I don't know much about, I'm just going to enjoy it like everyone else, right? So I don't know. It's easy to get too wound up about it. Sometimes you feel something's sort of morally true, more or less true. That'll do. I've got a bit softer. If you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I'd be very, very pious.